In this lesson, we are going to be taking a look at the different camera types available in V-Ray. If I just go to the perspective view and take a look around the room, you can see I've just added a few pieces of furniture to fill the room a bit. Now let me get back to the physical camera 003. To access different camera types, open up the Render Setup window. Under the V-Ray tab, go to the camera rollout, and here you can find different camera types and adjust them individually. Using different camera types, you can render orthographic views or 360 degrees environments maps or VR ready images. So it's pretty interesting. Let's dig in. Default is obviously the current view from scene camera without any adjustments, and you can see the render with the default type in the frame buffer. The scene was rendered for only 1 minute, and using brute force and light cache, so it's very noisy. Next we have spherical, which uses a spherical lens, and we can use this projection type to produce HDRI environments. What you need to do is to enable override field of view, which override physical camera's field of view, and set the angle to 360 degrees. Also, in the Common tab, make sure you have a 2:1 aspect ratio. In this case, let's set the width to 1000 and height to 500 pixels. And now if we render the scene, we are gonna get a 360 degrees environment map, as you can see in the frame buffer. Then we have cylindrical point. This camera casts all rays from the center of a cylinder. In the vertical direction, the camera acts as a pinhole camera, and in the horizontal direction, the camera acts as a spherical camera. For the first render, let's set the field of view to 65. You can see the render in the frame buffer. And for the next one, field of view was set to 130 degrees. We have cylindrical ortho. This camera casts all rays from the center of a cylinder, but in the vertical direction, the camera acts as an orthographic view, and in the horizontal direction, the camera acts as a spherical camera. And when the camera type is set to cylindrical ortho, we have a new parameter called cylinder height, which specifies the height of the cylindrical ortho camera. In this camera type, we don't have any perspective. Let's set the field of view to 130 and the height to 70 for the first render. And you can see the result in the view in the frame buffer. In the next render, cylinder height was 140. And for the last render, it was 220. And because the camera is not positioned vertically to be at the very center of the room, we get some of the environment showing up in the bottom part of the picture. And for the final render, field of view was set to 360 degrees and height was set to 140. And as you can see, we get this cylindrical 360 degrees orthographic view. Next we have box, and you can use this camera type to produce cubical environment maps. In the Common tab, let's set the width and height to 1000 and 1000. And if I render the scene right now, as you can see in the frame buffer, we get a cubical environment map. Next we have fisheye, which provides a fisheye lens. This special type of camera captures the scene as if it is a pinhole camera pointed at a 100% reflective sphere that reflects the scene back into the camera's shutter. When set to fisheye, we have a few fisheye related options in our settings. Let me just quote from Chaos Group or V-Ray's guide for these settings. When fisheye autofit is enabled, V-Ray will calculate the fisheye distance while you automatically, so that the rendered image fits horizontally with the image dimension. Fisheye distance controls how far the camera is from the sphere center, which is how much of the sphere will be captured by the camera. And fisheye curve controls the way the rendered image is warped. A value of 1 corresponds to a real-world fisheye camera. As the value approaches 0, the warping is increased. As the value approaches 2, the warping is reduced. For the first render, let's set the field of view to 20 and disable AutoFit. And as you can see in the frame buffer, we get this beautiful fisheye look render. For the next render, field of view was set to 40 and AutoFit was still disabled. Now for the next render, I enabled AutoFit and kept the field of view to the same 40. Now the render is fitting properly. For the next render, field of view was set to 80. And in the next one, field of view was set to 120, and because of the characteristics of this camera, we get a flipped image from a certain field of view value. And for the last render, let's disable AutoFit and set the field of view to 10. Normally you want to use lower field of view values when using fisheye camera to get that familiar look to real world. The next camera type is warped spherical, which is the same as spherical camera but uses an older algorithm. Next we have orthographic, which lets us have a non-perspective view of the scene like the orthographic views in 3ds Max. Basically we're going to have a 2-point perspective. All the lines in the view are going to be parallel to their respective axes. To see how this camera works, let's go to the physical camera 004. For the first render, let's set the camera type to default and disable override field of view. And in the frame buffer, this would be the render from the default camera type. But if I change the camera type to orthographic and render the scene, we would get this render. As you can see here, we get an orthographic or a 2-point perspective render. There is basically no perspective here. Now let's get back to physical camera 003. Next we have perspective, which overrides the scene camera to force it to be a pinhole camera. We have spherical panorama, which is a spherical camera with independent horizontal and vertical FOV selection that is useful for generating lat long or latitude longitude images for spherical VR use. As you can see, it's like the spherical type, but we get an extra vertical FOV parameter to control field of view vertically. Let's set the vertical field of view to 180 and override field of view to 360. Also in the comment tab, we need to decrease the height to 500, so we have a 2:1 aspect ratio. And the render would look like this. Next we have Cube 6x1, and it's used in generating cubic VR outputs, and the way it works is very simple. You just need to make sure you have a 6:1 aspect ratio for your final images. In the comment tab, let's set the width to 3000 and height to 500. And if we render the scene right now, we get this 6x1 sort of VR ready render. Perfect. So in this lesson, we learned about different camera types. I will see you in the next lesson.